Monster Reborn is a normal spell that can summon any monster from either player's graveyard, not once per turn. So how did it get limited? Monster Reborn was a part of Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever set and was busted on release. It sat among some of Yu-Gi-Oh's strongest spell cards like Pot of Greed, Dark Hole, and Raigeki. This is because in an era where normal summoning and passing was all you could do, being able to summon an additional monster, let alone a high level one for free, was broken. It would be limited on Yu-Gi-Oh's first ever limited list in 2002, banned on the first ban list in 2004, back to limited in 2008 because why not, banned again in 2009 because a free special from Grave on a spell was still broken, limited in 2010 because surely it's fine now, banned in 2013 because it wasn't, then finally limited in 2018 where it is today. It saw some play for a few months after its unbanning, but has since fallen out of favor. Should it stay at 1? Oh, no. Monster Reborn's time as a power spell has long since passed. Decks all have their own searchable versions of this card, so even if this card isn't once per turn, it's still just an okay extender. Bring it a 3. These cards are effectively the same. They both add a level 4 lower monster of their respective type. Warrior for ROTA and Pyro for Bonfire. The only difference is that ROTA isn't once per turn. So how'd they get limited? Mostly generic consistency pieces have always been in a weird spot in Yu-Gi-Oh! Usually they're very good and have served time / are currently serving time on the limited list. This is because searchers are good in Yu-Gi-Oh! And searches that can search for searchers are even better. They added the consistency of any deck they're played in for little to no downside. ROTA has been played in pretty much every warrior deck ever because of this. Bonfire's in a similar boat, only it's way newer and only searches Pyros. ROTA ping-ponged around the list for 12 years before landing on the limited list in 2015, and Bonfire would last for a year before going to 1 in 2025. Should they stay at 1?
No.
Now, I don't love the concept of limiting cards to hurt the consistency of decks, however these cards are in a weird spot where they are definitely too strong to stay at 3 but are nowhere near ban worthy. Being at 1 also means you don't have to deal with ROTA not being once per turn. Call by a Grave is a quick play spell that targets the monster in your opponent's graveyard, banishes it, and until the end of the next turn, the effects of that monster or anything else with the same name are negated, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Call by the Grave is one of the most ubiquitous staples in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! This is because it's able to negate any monster hand trap that this card sells for cost, which is most of them. This is an unbelievably broken effect because hand traps are how decks are reined in. Without them, going first becomes way too powerful. Call by the Grave will be released in 2018, a historically FTK-filled format in large part due to overtuned links, but Call by the Grave was able to stop the opponent from stopping you. And while it was at 3, every copy you opened stopped another hand trap. It will be slotted to pretty much every combo deck as a way to stop the only counterplay your opponent had. It would eventually be limited in 2020 and still sees consistent play to this day. Should it stay at 1? Oh, no. This card never should have been printed, let alone legal at all. Hand traps are an incredibly important part of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Like it or not, and they need to resolve. If you lose to a single ash on the normal summon, you either brick super hard, build your deck poorly, or sequence your hand poorly. Aside from breaking, these are all things you need to account for as a player in your deck building and your play. Call by the Grave is just a cheat code that lets broken decks get off scot-free. Ban it yesterday. Misk is a level 4 dinosaur that, as a quick effect during the main phase, can be sent from hand to grave to make dinosaur monsters you control unaffected by your opponent's activated effect for that main phase. It can also banish any amount of dinosaurs from grave, including itself, to summon a dino from deck with a level equal to the amount banished. So why did it get limited? Misk was released in 2017, only a few months before the brand new dinosaur structure deck. It brought with it some insanely broken cards that would go on to be a tier 1 to 2 deck for several years to come. The deck was known primarily for popping babies and OTKs, and the latter was thanks in large part to Misk. The hardest part about going second is having to play into your opponent's board, especially when they have several points of interaction to try and stop you. Misk lets you completely bypass this and play completely unimpeded. This will lead to Misk's limitation only 7 months after release. However, it will be unlimited in 2019, bringing it down back to a tier 1 deck with the release in August or in 2020, then promptly getting limited again in 2021. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card is just Sangan summoning, but way worse. I think this card is completely fine to stay at 1. It's one thing to search the card, but being able to consistently hard open it is definitely a problem. This card definitely has to go the moment Konami makes good dino support, but for now it's fine at 1. Gateway of the 6 is a continuous spell that has a lot of effects, but all you need to know is that when a 6 samurai is summoned, it gets 2 Bushido counters, and you can remove 4 Bushido counters from anywhere to search any 6 samurai monster. Not at all once per turn. So why did it get limited? The 6 samurai archetype has been powerful several times throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history, mostly due to their ability to swarm the field. In that sense, Gateway feels like a powerful piece of legacy support for a deck would have gotten in 2020, not 2009. This led to one of the earliest combo decks, and for a decent amount of time was one of like 2 decks that justified the existence of Max C, a deck from 2011 special summon more than some modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks. Another funny thing is that because you can take Bushido counters from anywhere, you can take them off something like a United and search even more. It would get limited in 2011, banned in 2013, and back to 1 in 2017, where it stays today. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
6 Samurai is a very toxic combo deck when it gets going. With their support from Rage of the Abyss, they're able to FTK even more consistently, something they've been able to do for a while now, and it's what got Gateway banned back in 2013. However, the deck is very bad, and they do already have a way to search Gateway, so putting it to 3 would only serve to buff an FTK deck. It's fine as is. Talents is a normal spell that can only be activated if your opponent used a monster effect during your main phase. It can either take control of a monster till the end phase, draw 2 cards, or look at your opponent's hand and return a card to the deck. So why did it get limited? Talents was released in 2020 and would see play almost immediately. Its change of heart effect was useful board breaker, Pot of Greed was great for extension, and the Forceful Sentry was powerful against hand traps. This last effect would be the primary issue most players had with the card since it punished interaction. You know, the part of Yu-Gi-Oh that makes it fun. It was just a little too broken to be able to rip your opponent's best card and play with full hand knowledge just because they had the audacity to interact with you. It took several very heavy hand trap forms for Talents to finally get limited in 2025. Should it stay at 1? Oh, no. I imagine the thought process of putting Talents to 1 was that you had to get it off thrust if you wanted to use it, and while this does make sense, it doesn't stop the problem Talents cause. The fact it's legal at all means you can still severely cripple your opponent for interacting with you, which is not an effect that should exist for the player going first. Chain Strike is a quick play spell that can only be activated Chainlink 2 or higher, and if there aren't multiple cards with the same name in the chain. It burns the opponent for 400 damage per Chainlink number of the card. So if it's Chainlink 2, it deals 800 damage, etc. Not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Burn was the main win condition for most early stun decks, and Chain Strike was always seen alongside it. These decks played lots of trap cards that could be activated at any point just to build huge chain links to blow up your opponent with Chain Strike. Fun ruling. Even though it says you can't activate Chain Strike if 2 or more cards with the same name are in the chain, you are allowed to chain a Chain Strike to another Chain Strike, since at the time you activated the second Chain Strike, there were no duplicates in the chain. This is the main reason Chain Strike got limited in 2007. It was already one of the highest damaging burn spells, and being able to basically double it could sometimes let burn OTK. It would get semi-limited in 2008, then randomly limited again in 2018. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
If this card went to 3, it would still be bad and no one would play it. Burn is way too difficult to pull off in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, and stun just has better win conditions. However, burn is really annoying, and it should stay at 1 for that reason alone. All 3 are continuous traps. Gozen locks you to 1 attribute, Rivalrly into 1 type, and there can be only 1 stops you from summoning duplicate types. So why'd they get limited? Rivalrly and Gozen are very old cards released in 2005 and 8 respectively, and TCBOO wouldn't come out until 2018. The first 2 had the usual fate for old floodgates. They weren't very useful on release because decks were slow and played enough removal that they usually weren't game winning. However, as the game sped up and decks trimmed out generic backrow removal, these cards started seeing much more play since they were just auto wins against specific decks. TCBOO, however, was released 10 years after them, a time when they were already playable cards. 2018 really was the year for bad design decisions. It's all played the same way the others did, a going first card that, if your deck could afford it, just auto win you games. They would all be limited in 2024 for no particular reason other than they made the game worse. Should they stay at 1?
Hell no!
Generic floodgates should all be banned, full stop. They do nothing but empower going first and create complete non-games. Brilliant Fusion is a continuous spell that fusion summons a Gemini by sending material specifically from deck to grave. So why did it get limited? Brilliant Fusion could do a lot of things, but all that matters is that it can summon Seraphinite by dumping a Gemini and a Light Monster to get you an extra normal summon. Up until around 2020, most combat decks were heavily balanced around the normal summon, and being able to get a second one was insane. What made it better than something like Double Summon was that it got to dump a Light Monster. Initially it was Trick Clown, but some eventually switched to Snow. This got you an extra 2 potential bodies in addition to the second normal summon. Fun fact, because you had to play a Gemini, people often played Garnet since it had the most attack. This is where the term Garnet came from, since if you drew it, you couldn't use Brilliant Fusion. Hence you drew the Garnet. This card would get limited in 2019, banned in 2020, then back to 1 in 2025. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
This card is super power crap. Playing a Garnet for a mid extender is just not worth it anymore. Decks now try and steer clear of Garnets whenever possible, so bringing one back for a little payoff just isn't gonna work. Shifter is a monster that, provided you have 0 cards in your grave, can be discarded to cause any card sent to grave to be banished for 2 turns. So why did it get limited? Shifter is a controversial card to say the least. What was initially released as by far the worst of the 2020 tin promos would eventually become one of the most influential hand traps ever. Its ability to shut off the opponent's graveyard for a turn was insanely powerful. It turn skipped almost every deck in existence. It saw some play in tier format, but 2023 was when it really became a problem. Kashtira not only didn't care about Shifter, it actively helped them. If they got to skip your turn with Shifter to put you under a Rise Heart, the game was pretty much over. Shifter wouldn't see much play again until Ritual Beast new support in 2024. This deck can not only skip your turn in a myriad of ways, it played better under Shifter than without it. The deck to finally do Shifter would be Maliss, which ironically played under it the worst. It will be limited in 2025. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
Shifter is a horrendously designed card. It's a turn 0 floodgate that shuts down 90% of decks. Your deck either plays Shifter or loses to it. Ban this thing. Gamma is a level 2 tuner that, as long as you have no monsters, can special summon itself from hand and aside from driver from pretty much anywhere to negate and destroy a monster effect, and it banishes itself and driver during the end phase. So why did it get limited? Gamma is a very powerful hand trap that's unique in its ability to both negate and destroy, and if it was only usable going second, it wouldn't be an issue. However, that's obviously not the case. Gamma is pretty much just call by the grave for certain decks. If you don't play lots of monsters or you start your turn with a ROTA, Gamma not only trades with whatever your opponent used to try to stop you, it gives you 2 bodies that you can use for anything. Mostly they would make Psy-Framelord Omega, which is a hand rip. So now the opponent's down 2 cards for trying to interact with you. It would come to a head when Super Heavy Samurai would play it. They had a must negate card that didn't turn off Gamma, so it was very easy for them to set up Omega before even starting their plays. Small correction here, some people did summon Omega with Gamma, but in Super Heavy specifically, they would more often summon Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon, which could then just immediately go up into Baron and be an Omni negate. It would get limited in 2023. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
I don't like this card, but I don't think it's ban worthy. 1 is fine because you have to play a 1-to-1 ratio with driver. It makes the card way less splashable. Also, you think this card is fine because it beats lingering hand traps. The problem is the lingering hand traps, not your ability to stop them. Midbreaker is a field spell that must be activated at the start of your main phase, so you can't search it. And it stops the turn players' monsters from being targeted or destroyed by card effects. So why did it get limited? This is one of the most puzzling cards ever. The entire purpose of the card is to stop players from interacting with each other. The whole thing that makes Yu-Gi-Oh feel like Yu-Gi-Oh. Anyway, it was released in 2016 and was incredibly niche. Due to the card being reciprocal, you need to have a deck that both cared about its monster being protected and had a win condition that didn't involve disruption of the opponent, which would exist in 2018 with Goki. Goki U-Link, which would eventually become Dark Warrior, was a combo deck that didn't aim to play Yu-Gi-Oh. It aimed to build a board so big and deprive the opponent of so many resources the game was over before the first turn was. The one weakness of the deck? Hand traps, which this card conveniently stops. This thing would stay at 3 for too long before going to 1 in 2019. Should Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
This thing should be banned. Any card that says your opponent can't interact with you is inherently toxic. These types of cards promote one-player build-a-board decks that aren't fun for anyone. Circo is a level 4 light cybers that can summon itself from hand by dumping a Mathmech for cost. Then if a Mathmech is summoned while you control it, you can add a spell trap. Only restriction on this guy is that you can only attack with one monster for the rest of the turn. So why did it get limited? Circo is one of the most push pieces of legacy support we've ever gotten. Not only is this a one-card starter for Mathmech, it's a one-card combo for most cybers decks. Dump Sigma, Sigma Reborn, search Super Factorial, make Allen Burschen, search Normal Diameter, Reborn, and from here you can pretty much do whatever you want. Heat Soul for a draw 2, Wicked for extension, or up Big Jammer into Transco for a one-card OTK through Circular's restriction. This would have been a much bigger deal if Circular didn't come out in the same set as Tearlaments, but once they all got hit, Mathmech started seeing some play. It wasn't tier 1, but it was a definite tier 1.5. Circular would get limited in 2023, be a solid tier 2 deck for about 6 months before getting banned in 2024. It would stay banned for over a year before getting limited in 2025. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card is in Demon Power Crab. One-card combos are much stronger than when Circular was around, and decks now are much less willing to play bricks for the sake of an end board. That coupled with the ban of Splash Bait means generic Cybers cards like this are just way worse. Skill Drain is a continuous trap that by paying 1,000 life points negates the effects of all face-up monsters on the field. So why did it get limited? Skill Drain is a very old card from back in 2003. It mainly saw play in stun and beatdown decks that tried to win off of having more attack points than the opponent. But with the prevalence of backer removal, it wasn't too big of a deal. As time went on, effects became better and Skill Drain only got better. It would continue to be annoying but not broken for several years, even getting limited in 2015 because the play pattern for Skill Drain decks was just so irritating. It would stay at 1 for 7 years before randomly going back to 3 in 2022. Now why this happened is beyond mortal comprehension, but my best guess is that they thought it was fine because it's just worse Mystic Mine. Once that got banned, it would be played mostly in stun, but Snake Eye would break it. Snake Eye could do a lot of things, but for what's relevant, they could send their own floodgates to not have to play under them. Skill Drain would be sided in for going first, and if your opponent started outing a bit too much of your board, you could flip it and stop them in their tracks. Then when it came back around to your turn, you could send it away in OTK. It would get relimited in 2024. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
Why this card isn't banned is beyond me. Floodgates and stun cards are literally the same as infinite negate boards people love to complain about, except they're even worse because there's no chance to interact with the setup. Rat is a level 4 beast warrior that on normal dumps a Zoodiac card, and if its material underneath the Zoodiac exceeds, that exceeds monster can detach special a rat from deck as a soft once per turn. So why did it get limited? Zoodiac is an archetype of Link 1's cosplaying as Xyz monsters. You can make any Zoodiac Xyz by using any one Zoodiac monster. You might see where this is going. Normal rat, overlay for a zoo, overlay for a second zoo, detach the first Xyz to summon a rat, overlay for a third Xyz, detach to summon a third rat. Now you have 3 monsters off of 1 card. You can also get this without needing a normal by using Barrage. Historically, Zoodiac could use it to get 2 rank 4s off of a single card, which added a ton of explosivity to the deck. Rat would go to 1 7 months after release, alongside the banning of both Trident and Broad Bowl. Notably, this all happened only a month after the introduction of Links. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card is much better with Link monsters. That combo from before, think about using Barrage to get up to 4 material by itself. That being said, it's a lot of bricks, and it does take a lot of extra deck spots. So much so that I don't think anyone would even play it. It's definitely a strong card, but it definitely takes too much investment. The girls all have the effect of Fuse, with shuffling materials back from hand, field, and or grave whenever they sent to grave by a card effect. Additionally, they all have a unique effect that mills 3. Sharon sends summon from hand, Havnis can summon from hand when opponents activates a monster effect, and Merly just mills on summon. So why'd they get limited? Tearlament was the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh history. Nothing even comes close. And this was because every card in the deck either mills, has an effect when milled, or in most cases does both. And some of the best mills were the girls, since they allowed you to fuse into Kikkalos, will let you search and mill even more. Sheeran was an insane extender, Havnis let you start milling as early as turn 0, and Merly sometimes was a starter. Tier will be the best deck for about 6 months, the last 3 being the tier 0 Ishizu tier format, after which all 3 of Sheeran, Havnis, and Merly would be limited. Should they stay at 1?
No.
Tier can have 3 of each name. It adds to the deck's consistency and makes its already insane grind game unbeatable as long as Kikkalos stays banned. As long as both Kit and the Miller stay banned, you can 100% put the tier girls to 3 and the deck would not be overpowered. Keldo and Midori have the same relevant effect. As a quick effect, they can banish themselves from the field or grave to shuffle up to 3 cards from either graveyard into the deck. So why'd they get limited? Tearlament. They were some of the best cards in Ishizu Tearlament. Not only were they strong in the mirror, they were absolutely suffocating for any other graveyard related strategy. The ability to remove any 3 cards from the grave destroyed most decks follow-up and sometimes even stopped them from comboing. In Tearlament specifically, they could be used offensively to stop your opponent from being able to fuse, or defensively to stop your names from getting banished by Bystials, or just put cards back in the deck so you wouldn't deck out. They added to the complexity and interactivity of Tearlament mirrors, but would have to go alongside Tier. They will be limited in 2023, only 3 months after release. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
These things are super annoying to deal with. They're basically so released on a quick effect. They've only seen a little play since the death of Tier. Purley played them for a bit so they could be discarded off their quick play spells or powerful against Unchained and could also recycle the cats, and some Tier decks still play them, but that's it. And honestly, good. These things are insane against graveyard decks like Memento and Fire King, and it's fine if the effects happen once each, but any more than that is broken. Dryas and Heal are both Link 1s that effectively take Sunseed Genius Loci as material. To oversimplify the way these cards work, Dryas adds a Sunrise Spell Trap on summon and Healer gains life points. So why'd they get limited? Sunavalon Rico, or Plant Link, was a very powerful deck despite how little it was played. The deck could set up some unbelievable endboards off of only 1 vanilla in hand, and because the deck destroyed players not familiar with the matchup, it was difficult to interact with. The main way to get your play started was with Dryas. You could normal Loci, Link for Dryas, add Sowing, Summon Twin, Twin Reborn Loci, make Healer, link Dryas and Healer into Jasmine, and from there you can pretty much do anything. The card will be limited in 2024. Should they stay at 1?
No.
Now you might have noticed something. The combo only used 1 Dryas and Healer. So again, why'd they get limited? Well, in some high roll hands, you could get a second Dryas and healer out to gain life and get an extra search off Jasmine, but that's it. In terms of follow-up, most of that came from your graveyard and Rika cards. I don't even think they hit the deck because it was cheap, because the hits didn't do anything. The deck got power crept at the same rate regardless. Bring him to 3. Duster is a normal spell that destroys all of your opponent's spells and traps. So why is it limited? Duster was one of the strongest cards in all of old Yu-Gi-Oh! Spell trap removal was so powerful it made it hard to run most back row. At this time, there was 3 MST, 1 Breaker, 1 Heavy Storm, 1 Duster, and even 3 Dust Tornado for Imperial Order. This led to decks only playing the best of the best traps because they weren't worth relying on unless it either won you the game or came close to it. This would lead to Duster's ban on the first ever ban list. Heavy Storm would be the only mass back row clear allowed for almost 10 years. It would eventually get banned in 2013, and for almost 7 years, both Duster and Storm will be banned. That is until 2020 when Konami thought it would be funny to unban Duster. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
This card should not be allowed. There is more than enough back row removal in the game. Blowout cards just make for non-games, and that's not fun. Ban it. Omega is a generic level 8 synchro that has the relevant effect to, as a quick effect, banish yourself to rip a card and return both it and itself during your next standby phase. Not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Well, the fact that it's a generic extra deck monster with a soft once per turn effect to hand rip didn't set you off, I don't know what will, because that is a very strong effect. Omega was a fine card for the first few years, but guess what? 2018 will be the year to break it. The main culprits were zombie piles that were able to summon 2 to 3 of these things consistently to hand rip and also use its other effect to recycle banished cards, which is also not once per turn. The other deck to do this was the newly released Junk Speeder. Since it was still Master Rule 4, you had to summon to Link Zones, which is why Omega being able to summon itself to the EMZ and then banish itself was broken, effectively letting you cheat the restriction. Omega will be limited in September 2018 to stop decks from being able to loop it. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card is a perfect example of a limited card. It's completely manageable at 1 copy, but unbearable at 3. Gold Sark is a normal spell that lets you banish any card from your deck, then add it to your hand after 2 turns, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Sark was released as a prize card in 2007, so very few players had access to the card, and even fewer were playing it. However, after its proper release in 2009, it would see experimentation immediately. Because the TCG and OCG shared a ban list at the time, and the OCG had gotten Sark years earlier, it was released semi-limited, though this didn't stop it from being played in lots of different decks. Lightsworn, Teledad, and Exeo were the most common adopters, but even as early as 2009, the card just felt too slow. It would actually be unlimited in 2011, only be limited in 2013. This was shortly after the release of Dragon Rulers, who all get to search when they're banished. Sark would get limited alongside the babies getting banned to curb their power. Come 2016, and Sark will be unlimited again and see no play. That is until 2018 when the Thunder Dragon archetype came out. They all search when they get banished, so it shouldn't surprise you that Sark got limited again to curb their power. And it stayed at 1 since January 2019. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
I don't like power 1-ofs. They make games feel super swingy. Games where Malice Hard opens this card feel completely different to games where they don't, and not in a good way. Astrograph Sorcerer is a level 7 pen monster with a relevant monster effect to summon itself from the hand whenever your cards are destroyed. Then search an additional copy of any monster that was destroyed this turn. Not once per turn, but that was only relevant sometimes. So why did it get limited? Astrograph was released right before the introduction of Lynx and Master Rule 4, the game rule that intended to slow down Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially Pendulum. Despite this, however, Pen Magician would go on to be a top tier deck for the next year, in no small part thanks to Astrograph. Pendulum had some powerful searchers that involved destroying their own scales. Astrograph became a great search target since you could immediately summon it, then add an additional copy of whatever you destroyed to search it. This would come to a head when Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite would be released. For all intents and purposes, this was just a much better Wavering Eyes than the extra deck. It was 2018, so of course it led to an FDK, and would get Astrograph as well as the FDK card banned in May. Astrograph would stay banned for 4 years before going to 1 in 2022, where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card being at 1 or 3 realistically doesn't matter, since you only really need the 1 copy anyway. That being said, Electromite is banned, and Pendulum hasn't been rogue playable in the past 5 years, so it's fine to go to 3. Divine Wind is a field spell that summons a level 4 or lower wind monster from your deck when your wind monster gets bounced. This is a soft once per turn. So why did it get limited? FTKs, yeah! Divine Wind was a potential man for quite a while. Its own archetype sucked, and so did every other wind archetype, so it was relegated to the unfortunate fate of Great Enabler with no payoff. That is until the release of Harpie Dancer. Dancer can bounce itself, then resummon itself, and that's all it took to make Divine Wind a 2-card FTK in 2013. It's a really long combo, but basically if you open a way to Divine Wind as well as a way to bounce a wind monster like Dancer, you could loop Gen X Blastfan and Gen X Ally Birdman, both with soft ones per turn, to go through 3 Divine Winds via Ancient Fairy Dragon, who was also a soft once per turn, to then loop Gen X Ally Axel, who could reborn a machine as a soft once per turn with Black Garden on field, which just gave the opponent a bunch of tokens. You would then search Fusion Gate to fuse into 3 Blaze Phoenixes using Elemental Hero Lady Heat, who is searched off Stratos during the combo, as well as the several leftover Gen X monsters. Blaze Phoenix has a soft once per turn effect to burn the opponent for the amount of cards on field, and with all the tokens from Black Garden, it was easy to FTK. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This combo sucks by modern standard, which is funny because you can't even do it anymore since AFD got a ROTA to once per turn. This card may have been scary with Stormwind's legal, but even that card got banned. Grass is a normal spell that mills cards until your deck has the same amount of cards as your opponent's. So why did it get limited? Grass was released back in 2017, was one of the most interesting cards for the time. If you're playing the max 60 cards and your opponent's playing the minimum 40 cards and you're going first, Grass would mill 20 cards, and even more if you're going second. This meant Grass decks had to play 60 in order to maximize its efficacy. Up to this point, it was unheard of to want to play more than 40, and for a while, decks even played 3 Upstart Goblins just because it made your deck smaller. But the potential for Grass was so high that some decks took the challenge. The main decks were Paleozoic and Zombie Piles, among others. All these decks wanted to mill as many cards as possible to get an insane amount of advantage as soon as possible. These decks will be strong for months before Grass will be limited later that year. Grass would have surged in Spiral format. Later in the deck's lifespan, it opted to go second, so a deck that aimed to make a billion disruption would do well against it. These zombie piles would get Grass banned since games where they opened it were almost unwinnable. It would get limited in 2024. Should it stay at 1?
Yeah.
Despite me being a Yu-Gi-Oh player, I like Grass, but I do acknowledge that this thing is absurd going first. I think the card is completely fine going second, and being able to search it off thrust is great for that. Daigusto Emeral is a generic rank 4 that has a soft once per turn effect to shuffle 3 monsters from grave back into the deck to draw cards. So why did it get limited? Emeral was released back in 2013 with C-play in most rank 4 decks. It was a nice bit of recursion that gave follow-up to every deck. Though its ability to recycle limited cards like Norden and Dulorn would be problems, none of it would affect Emeral itself. That is until 2017 with the release of Zoodiac. Zoodiac broke the Xyz mechanic by not only having an entire archetype of Link 1 Xyz monsters, but one of the best swarming tools ever in Ratpier. Not to mention their soft once per turn Searcher. This soft once per turn Searcher would go on to cause several problems, but the biggest one involved Emeral. Basically, you would loop Broadbull, who could keep searching Lunalite Black Sheep, who could add Fusion Substitute to repeatedly summon Norden, who could repeatedly reborn monster to end on a board full of Xyz. All thanks to multiple Emeralds being able to recycle themselves to keep the loop going on for quite a while. Emeral will be banned alongside the Zoo Xyz in 2017. It wouldn't be back until 2019. Should it stay at 1?
Yeah.
This card is fine at 1. At 1, it's super hard to infinitely loop it, and most decks have follow-up built in, so they don't generically need this anymore. All the Bystials share the effect to banish a Light or Dark from either grave to summon themselves, as well as it being a quick effect if the opponent has a monster. Additionally, Magma adds any dragon in the end phase, and Druisworm sends away a monster when it's sent from field to grave. So why'd they get limited? The Bystials were released in 2022 and see play immediately some of the best counters to Tearlament. Since they could banish the girls from grave, they were able to stop their fusions and slow them down. But what made them infinitely better than DD Crow is that they were bodies with additional effects. Mag could add Druis for the next turn, and Druis was great for playing into a board. Once you got killed, they would only see consistent play in Dragon Link, who would use them not as hand traps but as extenders. This would get Mag limited since being able to search any dragon in Dragon Link was a bit too much. Druis would stay at 3 for a while. It would see off and on play as a hand trap, but ultimately Maliss would do it in. Maliss could use any Bystial as an extender, so Konami limited Druis so they wouldn't reliably open it. Should they stay at 1?
Yeah.
These cards are still very searchable at 1, and if you want to play lots of Bystials, you can still play a max of 8. Mag might become a problem in the future, but as of now, they're fine at 1. Currently, there are 3 limited draw spells: Chicken Game, a field spell, Into the Void, which discards your hand at the end phase, and 1 Day of Peace, which draws both players a card and stops damage for 2 turns. None are hard ones per turns and all draw 1 card each. So why'd they get limited? Draw spells have always been in a weird place in Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, cards like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity were broken, but cards that just draw 1 were also played for a while. Upstart Goblins saw play for years because being able to effectively play a 37 card deck was very powerful. However, these cards have actual downsides, which lead them to only be played in specific degenerate decks. 1 Day of Peace was a stall card that was played in Burn and Final Countdown decks. Into the Void was only ever played in FDK decks that didn't care about the downside, and Chicken Game was played in everything until it was banned. These cards will be limited in 2013, 2020, and 2024 respectively to restrict the power of the decks they enabled. Should they stay at 1?
Yeah.
Individually, none of these cards are anything special. If you unlimit 1, nothing will change, but if you allow Upstart, Into the Void, and Chicken Game to all be at 3, there are several FDK decks that wouldn't be meta, but would certainly make the game worse. 1 Day of Peace should stay at 1 because stun decks are annoying. Instant Fusion is a normal spell that pays 1,000 life to summon any level 5 or lower fusion monster, but it can attack and dies in the end phase. Fun fact, this is one of the oldest cards to have a hard once per turn, and thank God for that. So why did it get limited? Instant Fusion was released back in 2006 and was not very good. Some Monarch decks played it as a way to cheat out tribute fodder, but it was generally outclassed by cards like Mind Control and Soul Exchange. It wouldn't start seeing widespread use until the Xyz era. Decks like Wind Up, Madolche, and Infernity often played it, and even some newer Synchro decks use it too. Its job was to get a second monster out for Synchro and Xyz plays. Now, Instant Fusion was a good card, but by no means worthy of getting hit. But with the release of Elder Entity Norden, opinions began to change. Norden reborn to level 4 on summon, and along with it being a level 4 meant Instant Fusion became a 1-card rank 4. It will be played in pretty much any deck with level 4 monsters for the next 2 years until Norden's eventual ban. Instant Fusion will pop back up in 2018, and you'll never guess this, it facilitated an FDK! Instant Fusion would somehow survive this before being limited in 2020 with Master Rule 5. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
This card doesn't see much play anymore, but whenever it does, it's doing something dumb. Anyone who sat across from a tier player who drew the 1-up knows exactly how it feels. Substitoad is a level 1 monster that can tribute a monster to summon a frog from deck, not once per turn. Also, it gives your frog monsters battle protection. So why did it get limited? FDKs, yeah! Well, kinda. Substitoad was a good card on frog decks for a couple years. Substitoad was good because 1, summoning any frog from deck was good, and 2, thinning your deck by removing any unnecessary frogs was also good, since you could just keep tributing a thing you summoned until you ran out. However, the real problem started with the release of Ronin Totem. Ronin can banish a frog from grave to reborn itself. This effect was also not once per turn. So what happens when you combine a monster that can effectively mill your entire deck with a monster that can resummon itself from grave? FDK! The frog FDK would use Substitoad to thin out your deck while having swap frog dump Ronin because a toad is not a frog, so that your draw spells could allow you to find Mass Driver. Mass Driver could tribute a monster to burn for 500, 200, also not once per turn. Once everything was in place, you would continuously resummon Rodent and tribute it until the game ended. This deck won Worlds, by the way. It would also get Substitoad banned, which would stay banned for 12 years before coming back to 1 in 2022. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This thing is fine to go to 3. As long as Rodent is banned, there is nothing broken this card can do. Gimmick Puppet of Strings is a generic rank 8 that can attach to place string counters on all face-up monsters, and using a rank up spell can be ranked up into Gimmick Puppet of Dark Strings, which destroyed all monsters with a string counter on summon, burn the opponent for damage equal to the monster destroyed with the highest attack, and draws a card. Also not once per turn. So why'd they get limited? FTKs, yeah! As one of the 3 people that play Gimmick Puppet pre-support, trust me when I say the deck quite literally did nothing. That is until they received some new support in 2024. Hopefully they give the deck some interesting new way to play, because the cards try and do a lot, so it'd be nice to have a more defined identity, and they're just FTK cards, with a field spell that protects them from hand traps. Fun. Machinax could summon big monsters to the opponent's field, which could then be blown up by strings to burn for big damage. Repeat a couple times and boom, FTK. It was super consistent and super annoying because it even had game going seconds. They would be limited about a month after the new support. Should they stay at 1?
Hell no.
You can still do the FTK! It's just way more fragile and inconsistent. I think all FTK cards should be banned regardless of their strength though. Obedient School is a normal spell that if you control no monsters can summon 3 level 2 or lower beasts from deck with different names. It negates their effects, destroys them in the end phase, and locks you into beasts. Not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Believe it or not, this card is 12 years old, and despite being a spell that summons 3 monsters from deck, it saw 0 play for 11.5 of those 12 years. The beast lock was killer because for the longest time there just wasn't a deck that only played beasts and also had enough level 2 beasts to summon. That is until Yummy. Yummy is a deck that had 3 level 1 beasts and could get by without summoning non-beasts. Yummy was great at building a board, but could struggle if their bodies got removed. Obedient School was not only 3 bodies by itself, it was a great push when going second. While yes, it did lock Yummy out of summoning Herald, in matchups where it was broken, they could just summon it on the opponent's turn with Snatchy. This card would be limited only 2 months after Yummy's release. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no.
I hate power 1-ofs that you just throw into an already good deck. Yummy doesn't currently play the card because the Mitsu cards are better, but I would love to see this card get banned so that Yummy doesn't just go back to using it. Terraforming is a normal spell that adds a field spell, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Terraforming was released in 2003, but wouldn't be playable for many years. Since most field spells were just mid-attack boosts, no one cared to search them. It would eventually see play in decks like Sylvan, Dragoonity Rulers, and Cosmo, but in those decks it was mostly just filling space. They rarely ever played 3 copies. The first deck to make use of 3 Terraforming would be ABC. As the first field spell deck, ABC absolutely needed to find Union Hanger, so they would always jam in as many Terraforming as possible. And this was around the time Konami started making field spells into starters, so more decks like Invoked, True Draco, Trickstar, Spiral, and Sky Striker all played multiple Terraforming. The card will be semi-limited in 2018 and limited in 2019. It just gave too much consistency to too many decks. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
I'm not a huge fan of generic searchers like this. Decks already have enough consistency through their own engines, so generics like this only serve to make dumb combos. I don't think it's ban-worthy, so keeping it at 1 is fine. Magical Explosion is a normal trap that can only be used if you have no cards in hand. It burns the opponent for 200 for each spell in your grave, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? FTKs, yeah! Magical Explosion was released in 2005, and despite technically being able to do over 10,000 damage in one burst, saw virtually 0 play in burn decks. It would only ever be played in FTK decks. Magical Explosion FTK involved drawing your entire deck with cards like Royal Magical Library and Graceful Charity, then just using as many spells as possible just to put them in the grave. If you found all 3 explosions, you only needed 14 spells engraved to FTK. Though due to its poor consistency and inability to play through a single trap card, the deck would be niche for years. That is until 2010. Draw spells had gotten better over time, so it became much easier to FTK. Eventually, it got consistent enough to get limited. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no.
This card is bad and hasn't seen real play since it got limited, but I don't care. This card can still technically FTK, and it's not like it has another use. This is a ban more from a design standpoint rather than a gameplay one. Naturia Sacred Tree is a continuous trap that has a relevant effect to add a Naturia card when it's sent to grave, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Naturia was a joke of an archetype for years. It had no coherent strategy, and the only cards that ever did see play were their Floodgate boss monsters. That is until 2022 and the release of the real Naturia cards. Now the deck has an actual game plan and repeatable resource loop that happen to synergize very well with the Runic cards. The Runic cards appreciated having a secondary engine, and the Naturia cards appreciated the draw power and consistency. You could being able to discard Sacred Tree to search for Camellia was great, but Camellia could also dump it to search for Blessing. This deck would never be the best deck, but it will be strong for several months after tier format, which is what landed Sacred Tree on the limited list in June 2023. Should it stay at 1?
No.
I think there was definitely an argument for limiting this card at the time, but it 100% could come to 3 now. Honestly, it could have come to 3 back in 2024 and it wouldn't have been played. Crossout Designator is a quick play spell that lets you declare a card in your deck, banish it, then negate the effects of the declared card for the turn. So why did it get limited? Crossout Designator had a very strange trajectory. In the OCG, it saw play right away since you could banish your own copy of Max C to stop your opponent from using it against you. It acted as additional copies of Called by the Grave for any hand trap you were playing yourself. And when the card eventually made it to the TCG, it was expected to be amazing, and for a while it just wasn't. Decks played hand traps, but they played less of them, so the card only fit into super fragile decks and ones with tons of non-engine. Until 2024 with the release release of Snake Eye. Snake Eye was a very compact combo deck that could afford to play tons of hand traps, and since the format was so dominated by Snake Eye, Crossout also got to double as an insta-win in the mirror. Crossout would outlive Snake Eye and be played into 2025. It would be played in both Ryzeal and Maliss as copies 2 through 4 of Call by the Grave, and made these decks that were already hard to interact with even stronger. This would get the card limited in April 2025. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
Hand traps are the only counterplay the player going second has, and being able to negate them from hand is insanely broken. Yes, there are some hand traps that are too strong and make non-games, but those do not justify the existence of anti-hand trap cards, and your pet deck losing to Valor definitely doesn't. Ban it. Pot of Prosperity is a normal spell that lets you banish 3 or 6 cards from your extra deck face down, then excavate the same number of cards and pick 1 to add to your hand. You cannot draw cards by card effects the turn you use it, and you only deal half damage for the turn. So why did it get limited? Prosperity was released in 2021 and will be broken right out the gate. Every deck wanted to play it because being able to dig 6 cards deep into your deck was amazing, and at the time there weren't many decks that cared about its restriction. Most decks only needed about 7 cards for their mainline combo, and the rest of the extra deck was just tech cards and extra copies, so most decks were completely fine with banishing a bunch of nightmares that probably weren't going to be summoned anyway. This made Prosperity one of, if not the best staple card for the next 2 years. The problem, however, came from the side deck. In Game 1, this card just added consistency to the deck, but in Games 2 and 3, it became a pseudo-searcher for every degenerate floodgate available, especially if you were able to save it until the end of your turn once you thinned your deck. If you managed to go 6 cards deep into your deck, you were very likely to find at least one of the stupid blowouts you sided in. It was both this and its mass use, as well as a reprint, that got Prosperity limited in 2023. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
The only problem I have with this card is the fact it gets floodgates, but that isn't Prosperity's fault, it's the floodgates' fault. It's fine to stay at 1. Also, way fewer decks can use it now that extra decks have become less flexible. Ryzeal Detonator is a rank 4 requiring 2+ Ryzeals as material. On summon, it attaches any monster from grave to itself, it can detach to protect any Xyz monster from being destroyed, and if your opponent activates a card or effect, you can detach to pop a card. The last effect is not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Ryzeal was released in late 2024 and would immediately become the best deck. They were all level 4s that could inherently summon themselves, then search for another one who could do the same. And the thing that put it all together was Detonator. Detonator was not only strong, but very easy to summon. In hands where you had to eat 3 hand traps, you could often still end on just Detonator and have that be enough. And once Eclipse Twins came out a month later, Detonator became even better. Now you could send Twins with X, then on either your last Detonator effect or when it gets outed, Twins would trigger to Reborn and give it 2 more activations, since Detonator's on summon effect would trigger. Detonator would get limited because it would often take your entire hand just to out the single Detonator, so then being able to summon a second one on the follow-up was broken. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
I hate this card with a passion. It completely kills any deck that relies on continuous spells and traps, field spells, set traps, etc. Unfortunately, the time to ban this thing has passed, and at this point, it's fine being at 1, as long as the rest of the Ryzeal names stay hit. Slash Draw is a normal spell that has a very long and confusing effect, but the short of it is, you discard a card, mill cards equal to the amount of cards your opponent controls, then draw a card. If it's Slash Draw, nuke the board and burn for 2,000 per card destroyed. If you didn't draw Slash Draw, effectively nothing happens. So why did it get limited? FTKs, yeah! Slash Draw was released in 2018, and it wouldn't see much play initially. It seemed like it would be another jank card with fun flavor but no competitive applications, until December 2018. Firewall Dragon was banned, but Danger decks still wanted to FTK, so Slash Draw FTK was born. You would use the Danger monsters to draw cards, and then turn them into Every Yugioh to draw even more cards, but more importantly, stack the bottom of your deck. So throughout the turn, you would draw into Slash Draws and put them at the bottom of the deck. Then, once they were the only cards left in your deck, you would activate Slash Draw, mill 1 for the Grinder Golem you donated to your opponent. The draw would always be Slash Draw, winning you the game. This FTK would be legal for 1 event where it would top before getting limited in January 2019, effectively killing the card. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This is an FTK card, and Every Yugioh is even easier to spam out than it was before. In fact, ban Every Yugioh while you're at it. The Tenpai Dragon archetype has 3 limited cards. Chandra, a level 4 dragon that summons a level 4 or lower fire dragon from deck when it attacks, and can quick synchro during the battle phase. Sangan Kaiman, a quick play spell that can either add a level 4 or lower fire dragon, or summon one from hand, or if you use it during the battle phase, you could do both. And Sangan Summoning, a field spell that makes your fire dragons unaffected in main phase 1, adds a Tenpai monster, and if it's destroyed, doubles a dragon synchro's attack. So why'd they get limited? Tenpai was released in 2024 and would immediately see success. Its gameplay was to blind second and just brute force their way to lethal. No interruptions, just battle. The issue came with how frustrating it was to play against them. The deck was so uninteractive. The only way they were able to consistently force through enough damage was by stopping your opponent from interacting with you. Summoning protects all your monsters in main phase 1, the rest of their effects only trigger in the battle phase, so cards like Valor won't work, and Chandra summons from deck in the damage step so it can't be ashed. It contributed to the misery that was 2024 and would see 3 of its cards getting limited during the year. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
I appreciate what Tenpai was going for, but it swung way too hard in one direction. Even if it's been power crept, those cards are just unfun to play against. Sekka's Light is a normal spell that lets you draw 2 cards, provided you have no spells and traps in grave and not being able to use other spell traps for the rest of the duel. It can also banish itself from grave to shuffle a monster from hand into the deck to draw a card. So why did it get limited? Despite being released in 2018, this card is not an affront to God. It would immediately see play in what was left of Burning Abyss. Some Thunder Dragon decks also did play this card, and while it would get some tops here and there, it would end up being too slow in the sea of Goki and Sky Striker. However, once 2019 rolled around, around, Burning Abyss would gain Cherubini, who let the deck go in a whole other direction. Block Dragon BA would be a very unique combo deck that took advantage of the several strong level 3 Earth monsters. You would use the BAs to summon stuff like Cherubini and Dante to mill and eventually go into Curious to mill Block Dragon. Block Dragon allowed for several dumb endboard pieces like Fossil Dyna, Appaloosa, and Naturia Beast, and this deck had no need for spells anyway, so Sekka's Light was just Pot of Greed. This deck would get Sekka's Light limited in 2020, but only because the list that did it was attempting to soft reset the meta, and once you hit the best decks, you gotta deal with the weaker ones too. Should it stay at 1?
No.
I bet this card is still at 1 because Konami forgot about it. It didn't need to be limited in the first place and could 100% go to 3. Phantom of Yubel is a level 9 fusion requiring a Yubel monster and a Fiend with 0 attack and defense. You could summon it the normal way. You're not able to hard summon Yubel, you have to summon it with its own condition. But 99% of the time you are summoning using its alternative condition of shuffling its material from hand, field, and or grave into the deck, not once per turn. Can't be destroyed by battle, and you take no damage when it battles, and it contributes itself to turn an opponent's activated monster effect into destroy Yubel monster in your hand, deck, or field. So why did it get limited? The Yubel support was released in 2024 and would turn this iconically bad anime card into a tier 1 deck. And this was largely due to Phantom. The other percentage was due to Nightmare Throne. Phantom just did everything. It could be summoned at any time with no commitment, often by shuffling excess monsters from your hand or grave back into the deck. And the fact it could be summoned multiple times per turn meant you could realistically go through all 3 in a turn. The first would be hand trap installation, the second could be used as an extra body, and the third was part of the end board. The first part was the biggest problem. This was a combo deck you had to stop early, but often you couldn't because Phantom would not only negate the hand trap, they'd plus off of it. It allowed for a ridiculously strong combo deck that would get Phantom limited at the end of 2024. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
I have no clue why the summon of this thing isn't once per turn, and limiting it effectively makes it a once per turn, so that's fine with me. Reasoning is a normal spell that forces your opponent to declare a level of monster. You then mill cards until you find a monster that can be summoned, then if it's not the declared level, you get to summon it. If it is, it gets milled, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Reasoning was released in 2003 and would quickly see play in Magical Scientist FDK. Since the deck played so few monsters, it was pretty likely you'd hit something you wanted, and if you managed to hit Dark Magician of Chaos off of it, you could add back Reasoning to use it again. This would get Magical Scientist banned, but Reasoning would stay at 3 for a bit longer. The deck to do it in was Dad, specifically the Destiny Hero variant with D-Mock. While Reasoning couldn't summon Dad, it could still summon D-Mock, and that was what allowed the deck to loop Disc Commander and draw tons of cards. This would get Reasoning limited in 2008. It would slowly be taken off the list, going to 2 in 2012 and 3 in 2015. It would be played in decks like Cosmo and Monarch, but Infernoid would get it limited. Only one Infernoid can actually be summoned off Reasoning, and the rest can summon themselves from grave. This meant Reasoning could easily mill half your deck and insta-win the game. It will be limited again in 2016 where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This is a card that is probably fine to go to 3 because of the way the card works. You can't play most hand traps, so your deck is inherently at a disadvantage. There might be an FTK with this card, but if you're basing your deck around an unsearchable spell, the deck is going to suck. Habakiri is a ritual monster whose effect would take the entire video to fully explain. So all you need to know is that it can get you full Mitsurugi combo, which is a board wipe plus force discard, an Omni negate, and insane follow-up, plus either our free rank 4, rank 8, or even link 4, all with absolutely 0 locks and like 1.5 bricks. So why did it get limited? Mitsurugi was a TCG exclusive archetype released at the start of 2025. It would see Fringe play in Ryzeal as a sub-engine, but would largely be overshadowed by the pure variant. But once they got their second wave of support, it all changed. Habakiri is not only arguably the best piece of support a deck could receive, but arguably the best ritual monster ever printed. It solely kept Ryzeal on top even after Maliss got its own custom second wave of support. But Mitsu didn't stop there. It saw play in any deck that had the room, like Orchist, Fiendsmith, and Azamina. But Yummy would take it to a whole other level. Mitsurugi Yummy took a bit to be realized, but once it did, it took over. The Yummies could make Herald of the Arclight during their combo to search Habakiri and allowed their already strong endboard to become unbreakable. And the Mitsu cards could also bridge into Yummy by making Zombie Vampire, milling a name, then linking off her Gravity Controller to do full Yummy combo. This deck would get Herald banned as well as both Snatchy and Habakiri limited in 2026. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no.
Mark my words, Habakiri will be banned before the end of the year. I didn't even mention the floodgates it could search via generic rank 4s. It's way too generic for its own good. Gemknight Master Diamond is a fusion monster requiring 3 Gemknights as material, and as a soft once per turn, it can banish a level 7 or lower Gemknight fusion from grave to copy its name and effects for a turn. So why did it get limited? FTKs, yeah! Gemknights are one of the worst hidden arsenal archetypes. Their biggest contribution to Yu-Gi-Oh! Is being the archetype with a bad card you didn't want to draw, or Garnet. However, with the release of Phantom Quartz in, you'll never guess this, 2018, the deck would be known for an FTK. Gemknight FTK made use of the non-once per turn fusion spell and Block Dragon to summon Lapis Lazuli. Lapis dumps a Gemknight from deck or extra deck to burn the opponent for 500 per special summon monster, and by herself she can't FTK, because while her effect is a soft once per turn, she can only be summoned once per turn. This is where Master Diamond comes in. Summon Lapis and dump a second copy to burn, fuse her away from Master Diamond, then have him banish one of the Lapis to burn, summon a second Master Diamond to banish the second copy to burn, and boom, FTK. This combo only works because there's now an extra monster zone to let you burn for 3,000 instead of 2,500. This will get Master Diamond limited in 2018. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
Gemknight has seen success without this card. Why bother unlimiting an FTK card when its own deck doesn't need it? Holly Sue is a level 5 Earth that, as a quick effect, can summon itself from hand by revealing another Vanquished Soul. And also as a quick effect, it can reveal a Darkened Fire to summon a Vanquished Soul from deck, or a Darkened Earth to steal an opponent's lowest attack monster for a turn. So why did it get limited? limited. Vanquish Soul was a middling rogue deck for its first couple years of existence. Its art and gameplay were cool, but a pop and Book of Eclipse just wasn't enough to hack it in 2023. But with the release of their third wave of support in 2025, it all changed. Halisu does everything. It can start your plays as early as turn 0, it can be a great interruption or an extender, and was a good earth. This propelled the deck to tier 1 for a brief month before being skyrocketed to best deck status a month later. With the help of the Canine archetype, Vanquish Soul would easily become the best deck of the format. It now had even more power than before and stronger turn 0 plays. However, the deck would have to be reined in on a subsequent ban list, so Konami decided to limit 2 cards, which were Raisin and Stake Your Soul. Yeah, Halisu was too new to be hit, but a few months later on the next actual ban list, Halisu was old enough to now be limited, freeing Raisin, which ended up being a buff. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
For now, 100% yes. But this is a card I would love to go back to 3 at some point down the line, just not now. 1 for 1 is a normal spell that, for the discard of a monster, summons any level 1 monster from the deck, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? 1 for 1 was released in 2009 and would see play in Mindmaster OTK decks. Mindmaster is a level 1 psychic that contribute a psychic to summon another from deck, not once per turn. So with a little setup, you could go through your entire deck to make 2 human psychic Borgs who can attack twice, and 1 for 1 was a huge piece of consistency for the deck. Since Emergency Teleport was already limited, 1 for 1 was the next best way to cheat out Mindmaster. This deck would get both cards limited in 2009, only 3 months after 1 for 1's release. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
1 for 1 saw tons of play while limited, and even still sees niche play today. While the last 2 meta decks to use level 1s opted for Archetypal Searchers or Piri Res Map, 1 for 1 is still a fine card. The biggest problem is that it requires you to discard, and a monster at that. While it does summon the monster, it's way worse into disruptions than most Searchers. It's fine to stay at 1. Dormouse is a Cybers monster that can banish another Maliss from deck, and if it's banished, can pay 300 life to summon itself. So why did it get limited? Maliss was released at the very end of 2024 and made a 2-deck format with its set mate Ryzeal. Maliss's gimmick is that it's a Cybers combo deck, but this time it uses the banishment instead of the graveyard. And the fact that it uses banishment meant that it had some very annoying advantages. You see, Dormouse effectively summons from the deck, since whatever you banish is just going to summon itself, but at no point are you able to ash it, and there are very few cards that are able to negate an effect in banishment. This meant that most of the time you just had to spam all your hand traps on Maliss's first play and hope they didn't draw an extender. It was one of those decks that you either stop completely and they pass on nothing, or you use 3 hand traps and they do the full board anyway. Very frustrating deck to play against, and the deck refused to die. The deck was hit 3 separate times and got White Rabbit and Underground semied, Dormouse and Jerusalem limited, and Link Decoder, Splash Mage, and White Binder banned. The Dormouse limit was on the 2nd list in 2025. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
You want to know something crazy? Maliss is still playable. It's a shell of its former self and will likely never win anything, but the fact that a deck with this many hits still functions is insane to me. I regret to inform you that Maliss is still topping events. Now, it's almost entirely due to the floodgates and non-engine they get to play, but still, somehow Maliss survived. TG Hyper Librarian is a generic level 5 synchro that draws a card whenever a monster is synchro summoned, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Hyper Librarian was released in 2011 and will be slotted into big synchro combo decks. These decks aim to, well, synchro summon a lot. The most effective will be Tengu Plan. This deck took advantage of the recurability of Reborn Tengu, Glow Up Bulb, and Spore to spam out tons of strong synchros like Trishula and Formula Synchron, and Hyper Librarian basically gave every synchro the effect to draw a card on summon. This will make this already strong deck even stronger. It would lead to Hyper Librarian getting limited after only 4 months. It would stay at 1 for 6 years before going to 2 in 2017 and 3 in 2019. Due to Master Rule 4, it became much harder to spam out tons of synchros, which is why they unlimited it. However, in preparation for the Master Rule revisions in 2020, they've relimited Hyper Librarian where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card by nature is very win more, since you need to summon it first, then summon multiple synchros to actually let it get value. And if your opponent let you draw multiple times off Librarian in a combo deck, you've already won the game. However, despite how bad I feel this card is, there's no reason to unlimit it. I can't imagine Synchron realistically playing more than 1 anyway, so unlimiting it wouldn't do anything, and I'd rather be safe than sorry with a card like this. Foolish Burial is a normal spell that sends a monster from deck to grave, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Foolish Burial was released in 2007 and would immediately see play in zombie decks. It paired well with cards like Zombie Master and Book of Life to kind of summon a zombie from deck. This would get the card semi-limited at the start of 2008. The next time the card saw serious play was later that year with Lightsworn, specifically as a way to guarantee milling Wolf. But around this time it saw play in a ton of decks. It could send Disc Commander or Malicious and Dad, Mizuki and zombie decks, Treeborn Frog and Monarch decks, and eventually Vayu and Blackwing decks. It wasn't a broken card, but it being played in so many decks got Konami to limit it in 2010, alongside a ton of other generic staple cards. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card has seen tons of play the entire time it's been limited. In the past it was a setup tool, but now it's a generic starter for lots of decks. It's generic consistency that is fine to stay at 1. Also, in my opinion, what makes this card okay and Gold Sark not is because it's infinitely easier to interact with a monster in grave than one in banishment. Solemn Judgement is a counter trap that, by paying half your life points, can negate a summon, spell, or trap, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Judgment is a very old card that, despite its power, took a while to see play. Once it did start seeing consistent play, it will be quickly limited since a well-timed Judgment could easily end the game on the spot. Judgment often only served to kick a player while they were down, since it could easily shut down their big comeback play, and because of this, it would be banned in 2013. It would stay banned for 5 years before coming to 1 in 2018. It would see some experimentation as going first card in side decks, but since there were much better blowouts, it wouldn't be played a ton. This let it go to 3 in 2019, where it would stay for 6 years, getting limited in 2025. This is because most of the side deck floodgates had been hit to 1, so decks started replacing them with Judgment. Beating a full board can be hard enough as is, but giving them a negate you can't respond to is just too much, especially if they drew multiple. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
I really hate counter traps. Unrespondable cards aren't inherently a problem in my opinion, but when they are generic negates that are only playable going first, they're not only frustrating, they're incredibly boring. I don't think any of the Solemn cards are well designed for modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but at the very least, the rest are specific enough to not be as oppressive. Link Karibo is a Link 1 requiring a level 1 as material. It contributes itself to make an attacking monster's attack 0, and as a quick effect, contribute a level 1 monster to resummon itself. So why did it get limited? Link Karibo was released at the end of 2017, and it patched up a lot of holes in several decks. While its effects were nothing crazy, it being a Link 1 with a reasonable material that pointed down was all it needed. It will be played in a ton of degenerate combo decks, never once being the problem, but always being involved. Then after 2018 was over, it calmed down, and Link Karibo was played here and there until 2024. This was when Snake Eyes became a real deck. Snake Eye was a very consistent combo deck that notably was very hard to interact with due to them having so many extenders, and Link Karibo contributed to this. You could link away one of your level 1s, and now you get to blank an Imperm Revealer for no cost. This would get Link Karibo banned in 2024. Not because it was a broken and unfair card, but because Snake Eye was too new to get seriously hit, but needed something anyway. It would stay banned for a little over a year before being limited in 2025, after Snake Eye was killed. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card being at 1 or 3 doesn't matter. No one played more than 1 anyway. It's a strong card and yummy, but it's not even the top 3 most broken Link 1s in that deck. Hornet Drones is a quick play spell that, if you have no monsters in your main monster zones, summons a level 1 token, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? In Sky Striker, this card was always fine. It acted as extra worse copies of Ray that could start your plays in a pinch. Where this card really shone was in every other deck. You see, by activating Hornet Drones to summon a token, you could link the token for Kagari add back Hornet Drones, then because it's not once per turn, you could use it again to make a free link too. And this was useful in tons of decks, and would get the card limited after only 4 months. However, this card didn't stop seeing play. Since you could just search it with Engage, most decks opted to just play Engage alongside it, the most notable being Orchist, which got full combo off a single Hornet Drones. Once Engage got banned, this card would fall off a cliff, and it would stay banned until 2024 when Engage went to 3. This let the card see play in early builds of Maliss in 2025 and Yummy later that year. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
This card is a problem in Yummy. Just like how Orchis could get full combo off a single Hornet Drones, Yummy can too. Since the token is a level 1, you can use both it and Kagari to make Cupsy and do the full combo. And this can all be accessed via a generic link too. Either Hornet Drones or Cupsy has to be banned because you can't do anything else to Yummy, and I don't see them banning Cupsy, so I'd be fine with a Hornet Drones ban. It would hurt Sky Striker, but not nearly as much as Yummy. Summon Sorceress is a link 3 that takes 2+ monsters with the same type except tokens. She had the relevant effect to summon a monster from deck with the same type as the monster it points to. She did negate the effects of the monster, but that hardly mattered. So why did it get limited? FTKs, yeah! Summon Sorceress was released in 2018 and would immediately be slotted into various Firewall Dragon combos. Her role was very similar to that of Curious, which was to get the unsearchable FTK enabler out of the deck. However, since you needed to resummon whatever your target was anyway, she was generally better at this job due to giving you an extra body. The most notorious combo involved Sork summoning Cannon Soldier and looping A Assault Core. This famously got A Assault Core limited, which is one of the funniest banlist decisions of all time. She would go on to be played in decks like Thunder Dragon and Dark Warrior, two equally as fun decks, before being banned at the start of 2019. She would stay banned for 6 years before being limited in 2025. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card received an interesting errata. It still summons a monster from the deck, but now you have to actually use its first effect and summon a monster to your opponent's field first, and it also locks you into whatever type of monster you summon. This card hasn't seen any play since the errata, and I doubt anyone would play more than 1 copy anyway, so bring it to 3. Final Countdown is a normal spell that, for the cost of 2,000 life points, makes you win the game in 20 turns. And just for clarification, 1 turn cycle in Yu-Gi-Oh counts as 2 turns, so 10 of your turns and 10 of your opponent's turns. So why did it get limited? Final Countdown is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's many alternate win conditions. This one was released in 2003, and for the next forever, it would only be played in stall decks. All it did was provide a win condition to the slowest of slow decks that relied entirely on floodgates and had no intention of interacting with the opponent. These decks have been hated by players forever because no one wants to go to a tournament just to be forced to sit across from someone who decided that they're only here to make their opponent's day worse. Final Countdown would see play in countless bad decks for the next 10 years before being limited in 2014, where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
No.
Despite how much I complained about this card, this thing is the worst part of any stun deck. It's only there to give your deck with no win condition a win condition, but nowadays it's not even the best one. The problem with stun decks is, and will always be, the floodgates. Ban cards like those and we don't have to worry about cards like this. Anti-Spell Fragrance is a continuous trap that forces both players to set spell cards for a turn before they can be activated. So why did it get limited? Anti-Spell was released in 2003 and saw virtually 0 play. For one, the game was much slower, so all this card did was stall for a turn in the hopes you could pop whatever they set, which wasn't very good. And 2, Imperial Order was still legal at this time, so if you really wanted to shut off spells, there was a much better card for that. Even after Imperial Order's ban, this card only ever saw niche play. Gladiator Gladiator Beast could play it since they had good backer removal, but even then it wasn't a mainstay in the deck. And this left the card to fall into relative obscurity until the release of Pendulum. Due to Konami's infinite foresight with regard to Pendulum, anti-spell completely stops you from setting scales. Since Pendulum monsters are treated as spells, you have to set them first, but you can't set Pendulum monsters in the scales, so you just aren't allowed to activate them at all. This let the card see some side deck play against Pendulum decks, and from here on out, it would see off and on side deck play. The game had sped up to a point where even just forcing your opponent to waste one turn ended the game. This card would finally be limited in 2024 due to Snake Eye. Since they could flip it like normal, then if they somehow didn't win immediately off of it, could send it away on the next turn to keep going. Should it stay at 1?
Hell no!
Before any of you leave a comment defending Floodgates, tell me the last time you played in-person TCG and what deck you played, because everyone I've ever met that actually plays Yu-Gi-Oh! Agrees cards like this aren't fun and ruin the game. They make going first even stronger and are only ever played when they insta-win the game. This card and every card like it should be banned. Infernity Launcher is a continuous spell that can send an Infernity from hand to grave, and if you have no cards in hand, you can send it to grave to reborn up to 2 Infinities. Neither effect is a hard once per turn. So why did it get limited? The Infernity archetype was released in 2010 and marked a huge shift in what combo decks were allowed to do. This was a deck that could end on multiple Omni Negates and big synchros relatively consistently, and a lot of their swarming potential came from Launcher. The deck's gimmick was that you needed to have no cards in hand to use the Infinity's effects, which often meant discarding your hand throughout your turn. This meant Launcher would always be able to summon back 2 to let you keep going. Another thing about this deck is that none of their effects are hard once per turn. So you could summon Archfiend with Launcher, Archfiend add a second Launcher, sink the Archfiend away, then you could do that 2 more times. This would get Launcher limited after only 4 months where it is today. Infernity would continue to see play until 2014 when Archfiend was limited. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
I am of 2 minds with this card. On one hand, Infernity is an Omega power creep deck that would struggle to put up results at locals, but on the other hand, it's an Omega combo slot pile that ends on a bunch of negates. If they did end up unlimiting this card, I wouldn't be too surprised or even upset by it, but if it was up to me, I'd keep it at 1. Set Rotation is a quick play spell that sets 2 different field spells from your deck, one to your field and the other to your opponent's. It also stops both players from setting or activating other field spells while either is set. So why did it get limited? Set Rotation was released in 2017, and this was around the time Konami started making some really good field spells. This meant the card would immediately see play in any deck that needed a field spell. However, what made this card more annoying than Terraforming was the fact that set a field spell to your opponent's field. The field spell Gateway to Chaos has a mandatory effect to add a Blackluster Soldier or Gaia card, and because this effect is mandatory, if you don't have a target in the deck, you cannot flip the card up. So what decks would do is play 1 copy of Gateway to Chaos to set on the opponent's field, locking them out of using their own field spell unless they destroy it. This became a big problem during Spiral format. That deck revolved around its field spell, so locking your opponent out of using it in the mirror was backbreaking. This interaction would get Set Rotation limited only 6 months after release. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card being at 1 actually makes people run it more fairly. Since you'd have to run a 1-to-1 Garnet ratio, it's way worse trying to lock someone under Gateway, which means the only decks that play it are the few that happen to run multiple field spells, and a card being a more restrictive Terraforming is fine by me. Card of Demise is a normal spell that lets you draw until you have 3 cards in hand. Your opponent takes no damage for the rest of the turn, you cannot special summon the turn you use the card, and you discard your hand in the end phase. So why did it get limited? Card of Demise was released in 2016 and would immediately see play, because when a Yu-Gi-Oh player reads a card that says draw 3, their brains explode. While the restriction of not being able to special summon is a big deal, 2016 was a slow enough time that certain decks could make use of it. Decks like Paleo, Cosmo, and slower Pendulum decks like Cleafort played enough back row to make the card work. The main play pattern was to set all your back row in your hand, draw 3, then ideally you drew into cards you could set or had effects engrave. This worked very well in Pendulum decks, since at the time the Pen scales had separate zones so you could have 2 scales and 5 back row. Come 2017, this card will be played in True Draco. Now as the game sped up, fewer and fewer decks were able to take a turn off to play this card, which meant the only decks that could run it were stun decks, and True Draco was just that. Card of Demise will be played in every iteration of pure True Draco until its limitation in 2020. Granted, it was a bit after True Draco's prime. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This is just a stun card. No fair deck can afford to run this card. Chaos Space is a normal spell that lets you send a light or dark from hand to grave to add a monster of the opposite attribute that can't be normal summoned or set and also has a level from 4 to 8. It can also be banished from grave to return a banished light or dark that can't be normal summoned to deck to draw a card. So why did it get limited? Chaos Space was released in 2020, and while it was clearly intended to be used in Chaos decks, its only real home was in Dragon Link. It could add one of the baby Chaos Dragons, and since you had to send the opposite attribute, you would immediately be able to summon them, then link them off to add the other. So this one card represented 2 bodies and a draw, since you could put the dragon you banished back with the grave effect. This card will be a fine inclusion in the deck for the next couple years until the release of the Bystial archetype, specifically a new search target in Lubellion. The Bystial engine gave Dragon Link not only a bunch of extenders, but a crazy grind game as well. This made Dragon Link a very powerful deck that unfortunately had to deal with 2 formats that were unbelievably cruel to it. Ishizu Tearlament destroyed every deck, but Dragon Link especially struggled with the graveyard hate, and Kashtira just summoned a giant Macrocosmos, which Dragon Link couldn't beat. However, while these formats were very unkind, the 2023 World Championship was going on at the time, and the Special Worlds ban list created a great environment for Dragon Link, making the deck not only the most represented, but the winner as well. And since every deck to win Worlds gets hit on the next list, Chaos Space would be limited only a month later. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card, just like ROTA, is mostly just consistency, and these types of generic consistency cards are fine to stay stay at 1. Card Destruction is a normal spell that forces both players to discard their hand, then draw cards equal to the amount discarded, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Card Destruction was released in 2002 and would immediately sit among the best spells in the game. The ability to mulligan your hand was super good, and the fact that it could also disrupt your opponent made it even better. And because it sent cards to grave, you could potentially reborn any big monster that was stuck in your hand. This got the card limited only 2 months after release, and it would stay limited for 11 years before being banned in 2013. This is because the newly released dragon rulers absolutely abuse this card. They can all summon themselves from grave by banishing dragons, so being able to get rulers into the grave, give them ample material to banish, and get a new hand of resources was unbelievably broken. It was stay banned for 5 years before coming back to 1 in 2018, where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This card has the potential to be insanely broken, because being able to dump your entire hand, get a new hand, then trigger all the grave effects is crazy, but this card being an unsearchable 1-of that is only conditionally broken means it doesn't see much play. I'd be cautious putting this card at more than 1, but at 1 it's fine. Monster Gate is a normal spell that requires you to tribute a monster to then mill cards until you find a monster that can be normal summoned, then summon that monster, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Monster Gate was released in 2004 and would be slotted into Magical Scientist FTK. This deck just needed ways to cheat out Magical Scientist and Catapult Turtle, and alongside Reasoning, Monster Gate was one of the better ways to do it. This deck would get several cards hit, but Monster Gate was not one of them. The next major deck to play it would be Diamond Dude Turbo, or DDT. This deck used Diamond Dude to copy spells with harsh costs so that you could use them without paying them. Monster Gate was played because it would either cheat out a big threat with DMOC or Diamond Dude who would become a big threat. It was also slightly better than Reasoning, since if Diamond Dude copied it, you wouldn't have to tribute. These DMOC combo decks would get Monster Gate limited in 2008. It would stay at 1 for 11 years before going to 3 in 2019. It would see basically 0 play, then got limited in 2022. Should it stay at 1?
No.
I think the reason they relimited this card is because they unbanned both Snow and Destrudo on the same list and they were worried about mill decks, but even at the time it was a weird limit. It could come back to 3 and see no play, since any deck trying to play this card can't play most hand traps. You don't want to summon Ash off of it. Striker Dragon is a Link 1 dragon that takes a level 4 or lower dragon as material. On summon it adds Boot Sector Launch. It can pop a monster you control to add back a rocket from grave. So why did it get limited? Striker Dragon is a very funny card to talk about in this series, because its effect was good, but it was only partly why the card got hit. You see, there are a lot of dragons with good grave effects, and because Link 1s are broken, Striker Dragon was able to easily proc any of these effects. And the fact that it pointed left meant that it could combo with Guard Dragon Pisty, and that's mostly it. It was a Link 1 with a positive effect and a decent arrow. It will be limited in 2021 as hit to Dragon Link alongside banning LP. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
Dragon decks have access to 3 Link 1s currently. There's Striker Dragon, of course, there's Pisty, and the Blue Eyes Link 1. For most purposes, they are the same as Striker Dragon. Now, if they do unlimit Striker Dragon, I don't think it would realistically do anything for the Rocket deck, but there's really no need to. Fiendsmith's Lacrima is a fusion monster requiring 2 Light Fiends. On summon, it reborns or adds back a Light Fiend from grave or banishment, and if it's sent to grave, could shovel back a Light Fiend to burn for 1200. So why did it get limited? The Fiendsmith archetype was released back in 2024 and would immediately see play as a sub-engine in many decks, most notably the 2 best decks at the time, Snake Eye and Yubel. They could be accessed through a generic Link 2 and could set up 2 Solemn Warnings, an on-field negate, Appaloosa, or Beatrice. Most of this was thanks to Lacrima's ability to reborn. Since you would fuse into it with sequence using material from grave, you could turn a Link 2 worth of material into 4. However, it would be the random burn damage to actually get this guy hit. The way old time rules worked at tournaments was that the player with less life would lose the game when the time was called. This led to some players playing cards that dealt negligible amounts of burn damage just to win in time. Lacrima was so good at cheesing wins in time, it would get itself banned after only 2 months. It would stay banned for a year before being limited in 2025, after they changed the time rules. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This is one of the fastest banned cards ever, and that was seemingly intentional. This card was released as a common alongside a TCG exclusive card that served basically the same purpose as Lacrima. This allowed Konami to ban an important part of their new deck because their placement was released in the same set. Also, bring this card to 3, it being at 1 or 3 doesn't matter since you only play 1 anyway. Metamorphosis is a normal spell that tributes a monster to cheat out a fusion with the same level. So why did it get limited? Metamorphosis was released back in 2003 and would immediately see play in Goat Control. The interaction this deck was named after was using Metamorphosis to tribute a Scapegoat token to summon Thousand Eyes Restrict, which stopped both players from attacking and slowed the game down for the deck to do its thing. This deck would be iterated on and would even become the deck Goat format would be named after. It would see play again in 2007 in Demise OTK. This deck, as the name suggests, used Demise to wipe the board on OTK, and the way they got the damage was with Metamorphosis tributing Demise, summon Cyber Twin Dragon, and attacking twice. If you had Megamorph, this could deal over 10,000 damage. This would get the card banned. It would stay banned for almost 20 years before going to 1 in 2026. Should it stay at 1?
No.
This card is only seeing play in some Fairy Tail decks. They're using the card not as a way to summon the big floodgate monsters everyone was scared of, but instead using it as an extender to cheat out their archetypal fusions. While yes, it can be tempting to want to use Metamorphosis to summon Last Warrior and Kashtira, you have to realize that you'd be playing a horrible deck just on the off chance you draw an unsearchable card going first, to then also hoping that you can beat your opponent across several turns before they draw one of the many outs that every deck plays. You could summon Dragoon, but you can already do that more consistently with the new D mod, and Exterio is definitely strong, but Varujus is way more consistent. As long as this card remains unsearchable by normal means, it will only see play in decks that can use it as an extender. The Yummy archetype has 3 limited cards. Yummy Snatchy, a Link 1 that places a Yummy field spell from your deck and lets you quick synchro, not once per turn. Cupsy Yummy, the deck's best starter that adds any Yummy Yummy card on summon, and Cupsy Yummy Way, a synchro that can use a Link 1 as a level 1 tuner, adds any 2 Yummy cards on summon, then discards, and can shuffle itself back into the extra deck to reborn 2 Yummies when the opponent uses an effect. So why'd they get limited? The Yummy archetype was released in 2025, and it alongside its setmates K9 and Dracotail would shape Yu-Gi-Oh! For the next year. While initially Yummy was played as a more low-to-the-ground deck, it will be discovered relatively quickly that the cards worked very well with other decks. Famously, it worked well with Mitsurugi, creating one of the most degenerate combo decks in recent memory, a deck that could easily win the game off a normal summon of Cupsy, and Cupsy was insane, because the only way to fully stop it was to both negate it and remove it from the field. If you just negated it, they would link it off for Snatchy, reborn it with the field spell, make Cupsy Way in full combo. If you just removed it, they would add Surprise, use the Surprise to resummon Cupsy, and do the same thing. The deck was resilient, consistent, and very small, so you could either play it with 20 hand traps or a large sub-engine. This would leave the Snatchy's limitation in 2026 to hit the deck's follow-up, and the limitation of Cupsy's later that year. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
Snatchy and Cupsy to 1 makes sense. I have no clue why Cupsy Way is at 1. It really does seem like the intern at the ban list was told to limit Cupsy and he didn't know which one they meant, so he limited both to be safe. These cards are powerful, but they're not tier 1 anymore. Fairy Tail Snow is a level 4 spellcaster that books a monster on summon, and it can banish 7 cards from your hand, field, and or grave to reborn itself as a quick effect, not once per turn. So why did it get limited? Snow was released in 2016 and wouldn't take long to see play. Lightsworn zombie piles that aim to mill their entire deck made great use of this card. You would just banish all your useless spells and monsters with banish effects to be able to summon Snow with little cost. Snow would be an integral part of this deck throughout its iterations, but the deck wouldn't get Snow touched. The deck to get Snow banned was Thunder Dragon. The idea was the same as before. Mill a bunch of names alongside Snow, then have Snow banish all your Thunder Dragons to trigger their effects, since they all have effects when they're banished. Snow would stay banned for 3 years before coming back to 1 in 2022. However, it wouldn't last long, as it would be banned again that same year. Snow was played in the new pile decks that abused the new milling tools available, but it was tier that sealed the deal. Snow would stay banned again for another 4 years before being limited in 2026, where it is today. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
Snow is undoubtedly a strong card, however without the generic mill tools it once had, its generic use is significantly worse. Snow currently only really sees play in the Fairy Tail deck, which is exactly where it should be. Premature Burial is an equip spell that summons a monster from grave then equips itself to said monster. If Premat is destroyed, so is the monster, not once per turn. So how did it get limited? Premat was released in 2003 and would immediately see play since reviving monsters was super strong in old Yu-Gi-Oh! This would get limited after only 2 months, where it would stay for the next 6 years. During this time it acted largely as a weaker Monster Reborn, until Monster Reborn got banned when it then became the premier revival spell. It would be played in pretty much every deck until its ban in 2008. The list aimed to take out the Perfect Circle deck, which could use Premat to revive Discommander to draw a bunch of cards. Premat would stay banned for 18 years before being limited in 2026. Should it stay at 1?
No.
Despite this card being banned long enough to vote, it is severely past its prime. It just doesn't have a home. Monster Reborn has been at 1 for years and has seen 0 play. Spell card Monster Reborn is a generic quick effect reborn and still sees no play. And even though there are cards that can search Premat, decks would much rather just search their own archetypal reborn spell. And currently the only decks that could theoretically search it are Mikanko, which is terrible, and Dooms, which conveniently got their own better version of Premat at the same time they unbanned it. Without a Zol, this card is just a gimmick. I'd be interested to see what it could do at 3. Synchro Overtake is a normal spell that reveals a synchro monster in your extra deck, then adds or summons one of the listed material from deck or grave. Then you're locked into synchros. So how'd it get limited? Synchro Overtake was released in 2021. It was intended to be used in the Synchron archetype, and while it was used, it was nowhere near enough to propel the deck to any tier higher than Rogue. The main problem with this card is that synchro monsters rarely have named monsters as material, and the ones that did were just bad anime cards. This led the card to not see much play for the next 5 years until the release of the Cool Toon deck. Cool Toon is a synchro deck whose synchro specifically mentions some of their monsters. Notably, you can summon Mix and Rico, both of which search for another name and get you off to the races. And since this deck is very reliant on sticking a monster on board, being able to summon something from deck was super helpful. Overtake would get limited at the same time Cool Toon got its real support as a pre-hit to the best deck. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
For now, this card should 100% stay at 1. It's arguably a bannable card currently since you can still search it. Once Cool Toon has either been dealt with on the ban list or has been sufficiently power crept, there won't be a reason to keep this card hit. X Ryzeal is a level 4 light pyro that can dump an Xyz monster to summon itself from hand. Then as long as you don't control a non-level / rank 4, you can add a Fire Thunder Ryzeal. So why did it get limited? Ryzeal was a rank 4 spam deck that was really good at summoning level 4 monsters. First you summon a 4, then that 4 searches for another 4, then you get to summon that 4, and guess what that 4 does? It searches another 4 that you can then summon. And X was the best one for going second. Since it gets to dump an Xyz monster, you are most often going to dump Aggregator, who gets to negate something when it's sent to grave. And because its send is not only cost, but part of an inherent summon, you don't have a chance to stop them from activating their effects. And if this was all X did, no one would have a problem. But Konami had to go and release Eclipse Twins shortly after Ryzeal's release. This card let Detonator become 6 disruptions by itself and also let it resist removal. And the only way they could actually access this was through X dumping it. It made a cool board breaking card into another broken going first card. X would get semi-limited pretty early on in 2025 and limited later that year. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
Ryzeal is still a strong engine in rank 4 at X, and X is one of their best cards. It's super searchable, so keeping it at 1 is fine. Branded Fusion is a normal spell that fusion summons an Albaz Fusion by using material from hand, field, and or deck, and you're locked out of summoning non-fusions the turn you use the effect. So why did it get limited? The Branded Structure deck was released in 2022, and it included several cards that would go on to define define one of Yu-Gi-Oh's longest supported decks, and the card to bring it all together was Fusion. Branded Fusion was the first fusion spell to be able to exclusively use material from deck while also not having any real downside of the monster summoned, any activation conditions, or significant locks on the user. This one card being so all-encompassing let the deck initially play as a mid-range deck alongside the Despia and Adventure cards, back when Mirror Jade Pass was good enough. As more support came out, the deck's ceiling grew, but its engine would survive for a long time unhit. When it did get hit in 2024, the first time Fusion got limited, it was well after its prime. It would stay at 1 for a year before going to 2 in 2025. This was meant to both support the new Dragotail deck as well as to make the new branded structure deck even better. At 2, it saw tons of play in Dragotail as well as pure branded, and while neither of these decks were doing anything unfair, Fusion was still re-limited to hit the decks. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
Dragotail is still a fine deck, albeit very inconsistent, and branded is currently a top 2 deck. They clearly don't need extra copies of Fusion, and it's not like the card isn't searchable. Maliss P White Rabbit is a Cyberse monster that sets a Maliss trap from deck on summon, and can resummon itself when it's banished by paying 300 life. So why did it get limited? Hopefully for the last time, Maliss was a deck released in 2024, and it alongside Ryzeal would go on to define the meta for the next 6 months. Maliss plays like every other generic Cyberse pile. The goal is to summon one monster and turn that one monster into several links. For White Rabbit's part, it was another starter for the deck. While it wasn't as good as Dormouse, it got the job done. It was also integral for the deck being able to play through interruptions. Since all the Maliss traps can be used to turn their set by banishing a Maliss, you could often use the traps to protect important effects from cards like Imperm or Valor. The Maliss deck also refused to die. It was hit on 4 separate lists, getting 3 cards banned, 3 cards limited, and another semied. Should it stay at 1?
Yes.
This is what it took to finally put Maliss down, and even still, the deck is playable. I do wish they did something about the cards that actually let Maliss win games, but I'll take what I can get. Radiant Typhoon Chant is a quick play spell that adds either a level 4 or lower Radiant Typhoon monster or MST, and if it's popped by MST, it resets itself. So why did it get limited? The Radiant Typhoon deck is based on the global experience every child had when they first played Yu-Gi-Oh, thinking MST negates, and while unfortunately they can't make MST negate, the deck has a card that kind of lets it negate. The deck would be a strong pick at the start of 2026 as both a pure strategy as well as an engine in other decks. Since all the little monsters are free summons from hand going first, combo decks like Maliss and Yummy Piles would play it as free extenders. The Yummy Pile specifically was popular for a while. It played every single good tri-type without locks and just one going first, if you didn't draw a Droll. These decks started to be phased out due to them losing super hard to Droll, Fua, and going second, but not before Radiant Typhoon Chant got limited. Should it stay at 1?
No.
Of all the cards they could have hit, Chant might be the worst one. The Tri-Brigade Yummy Pile was good, but limiting Cupsy was already a big hit to that deck. It also was not the most annoying Yummy Pile. I really don't know why they went with Chant to 1. Bring it to 3. The Dragotail deck has 3 limited cards, all of which allow you to fusion summon. Rahu and Ketu are both fusion spells. Ketu is a ROTA, but if your opponent has a monster, is also poly, and Rahu fuses into a Dragotail by using material from hand, field, and or deck. Malulu is a monster that can fuse into a Dragotail fusion as a quick effect, and if it's used as fusion material, sets a Dragotail spell trap from deck and negates a monster permanently. So why did it get limited? Dragotail was released in 2025 alongside 2 of the strongest decks Yu-Gi-Oh had ever seen, and before the set's release, players believed Dragotail to be significantly weaker. Since the deck was a more mid-range advantage-focused deck, the community thought it wouldn't be able to keep up with K9 and Yummy. However, the sheer advantage the deck could accrue off a single fusion would quickly push it to top-tier status. Its biggest strength was its ability to go second. If either Ketu or Rahu resolved, they could easily out 2 to 3 cards by themselves, and its going first board was no slouch either. The deck would stay as a top 3 deck for the next 10 months. It received some extra waves of support, some directly and some indirectly, which would eventually get Malulu and Ketu limited in 2026 and Rahu limited on the next list. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
Dragotail is my favorite deck of all time. I played it from the day it came out to the day it got hit. The deck is still playable as a sub-engine in decks like Branded, but it isn't the same. I acknowledge that deck shouldn't be meta for that long, so while I am sad they're hit, I do understand. The K9 deck has 2 limited cards. Jokul, a level 5 monster that can be normal summoned without tribute if your opponent has at least 2 cards in hand, and it can special itself alongside another level 5 by revealing both in hand. And when it's on field, it can add a non-aqua K9, so just not itself. And a Case for K9 is a continuous spell that adds a K9 in activation and sets a K9 quick play spell when it's destroyed. So why'd they get limited? K9 was released in 2025 and was the most hyped deck to come from Justice Hunters. It released shortly after Vanquish Soul got its real wave of support, and because the decks had a ton of synergy, players had very high expectations. The K9 engine could be accessed via their generic rank 5 Ripper, which Vanquish Soul could do since they had 2 powerful level 5 monsters, and the K9 monsters also had the right attributes to activate the Vanquish Soul effects. This combined with both their archetypal turn 0 plays allowed this deck to become the best deck in the format. However, the K9 cards had a few health related issues. Ripper negates hand traps, which made it much easier for the deck to summon any of their floodgates, and Jokul is one of the best starters a deck could ask for. Aside from Dominus Impulse, there isn't a hand trap that stops Jokul's effect to summon, and because its summon meant a free rank 5, opening Jokul not only meant full combo, it meant you also got to blank a hand trap. This led to some degenerate decks and would ultimately get Jokul limited as well as its best searcher. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
K9 has since gotten Noroi banned, but 3 Jokul or Case would still be a problem. As long as Ripper exists, K9 has to stay in a weakened state. That card just does too much if it's easy to summon. Exodia is a... who am I kidding? You know what this card does. So why did it get limited? Exodia is one of the most iconic cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, up there with the likes of Pot of Greed and the Blue Eyes White Dragon, and it also is among the first cards to ever be limited in the TCG. It was limited only 2 2 months after Yu-Gi-Oh's first set and has never once moved. This is for 2 reasons. 1, having each piece at 3 potentially makes it too easy to draw them, and 2, there's only 1 Exodia. You can't just have 2 left legs in your deck. Now at 1, Exodia has seen play several times throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's existence, either as a stall strategy hoping to slowly draw all the pieces by stopping your opponent from playing, or as a big combo that hopes to find all 5 pieces in a single turn. Both variants have seen various levels of success. The stall variant got top 8 at Worlds in 2012, and the combo variant famously won a feature match in 2023. Since then, Exodia hasn't had much success. It did get a new deck that tried to steer it away from its previously boring game plan, but that deck is mostly remembered for its generic applications. Should they stay at 1?
Yes.
Unfortunately, Exodia is a very unfun win condition to play against, because you're either locked out of the game by floodgates or FDK'd by them drawing their whole deck in 1 turn. Now, if the pieces did go to 3, I'm not even sure if it would be optimal to play them all, but above all else, the reason they should stay at 1 is because it's Exodia, the most iconic limited card.